She eased her luxury EV onto the shoulder, set my suitcase on the gravel, and pressed a single bottle of water into the dust. Then the door seals kissed shut. "Call me when you're ready to support," my own daughter said, before gliding away into a no-service sky. In that engineered quiet, a lifetime of fatherhood cracked like bad joinery. The forged signatures, the good debt she called my home, the power of attorney turned into a crowbar. What broke wasn't just trust, it was the foundation. And when foundations fail, you don't plead with the paint, you rebuild the frame, lock by lock, clause by clause, until your name belongs to you again. This is how a week of silence became the loudest answer I've ever given. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I never thought the smell of new leather could make my memories loud, but there I was in the passenger seat of a Rivian R1S, with silence so plush it made every thought echo. The electric motors whispered up the bare tooth, the cabin sealed tight as a traveling chapel, and the only mechanical sound was the faint click of my seatbelt when I shifted to stretch an old carpenter's back. The window framed a stack of slate blue peaks and yellowing larch like rafters rising into sky. In my pocket, Helen's little bone-handled pocket knife rested where my heartbeat could find it, the way my hand used to find hers at the first switchback. Tradition said we'd leave a sprig of water hyacinth by the creek she loved. Habit said I'd keep that promise for both of us. Erin drove with a posture that said she had never missed a green light in her life. She thumbed Driver Plus on the wheel, brought her phone up, and the entire mountain range was made to listen to business through the car's speakers. Bryce's voice cut through the velvet cabin, crisp as a new chisel. "Windows open, Erin." If your dad signs the durable POA, we can unlock the HELOC on the lake place this week. A sliver of Montana sun flashed across the screen on the dash, across her cheekbone, across the folder she had tucked under her thigh like a promise wrapped in office beige. When I was young, the old Ford pickup climbed these same miles with an honest growl, AM radio buzzing like a mosquito that had read too much Whitman. Back then, the noise made room for us. This high-tech hush polished everything, even the pressure in my chest. I watched the road stripe slide under us and checked my internal level, a carpenter's superstition. If the foundation is true, the frame behaves. If it's out of square, paint is only lying. "Let's keep it off work today," I said, gentle as I could. "We're headed to Helen's Creek." "We are keeping it in the family," she said, eyes forward. "Family is optimization." The words landed like a slick finish on soft wood. Beautiful, sure. But if your joists are spongy, no gloss saves you. The Rivian screen blinked a coverage warning, no service ahead. Erin flicked it away with a fingernail. "We'll fast charge in Cook City," she said. On another notification, she pressed her thumb to black out the bank's name. I caught the motion in the reflection and set it aside like a warped board for later evaluation. I tried for the softer cut. "You remember the side path through the young pines? The creek opens up there. Your mother laughed when the water took her sandal. She said the cold felt like a clean sheet." "Mm-hmm," she said, that little neutral sound people make when they're trying to thread a calendar invite. "I've got a partner call at 3 Mountain. We won't be long." Missoula had taught me to distrust speed for speed's sake. My town was a slow saw you kept sharp, a place where neighbors swapped clamps and the library hosted my Saturday workshop. Build your own bookshelf, no tuition, but show up sober. I looked out across the valley and saw roofs the way a woodworker sees joinery. 1,000 dovetails holding lives together. A house is for shelter, I told myself, not an asset class. But when you love a thing, you're last to notice when termites move in. We pulled into a turnout. Erin killed the climate to save a few miles of range, and the mountain air slid into the cabin, pine and mineral in a kind of stern clarity that strips your words to grain. If Helen had been there, she would have rolled down the window to her shoulder and said the quiet here wasn't empty, only patient. Without her, the quiet felt expensive, like a showroom where no one touches anything. Back on the road, Erin slid a folder across my knee without looking. "Sign these at lunch," she said. "Durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, a couple of electronic consent writers. It's standard, Dad." "There's no such thing as standard when it's your name," I said. "Ruth should look." "Ruth lives in the past," she said. "I'm trying to protect your future." My future, I wanted to say, was a porch that doesn't sag and a bed where the mattress remembers me kindly. I opened the folder anyway. The language behaved like a polite stranger, nodding while it reached for my wallet. Phrases like good debt, optimization, and emergency authorization stood at attention. The lake cabin's parcel number stared up from a page as if it were guilty of something. I closed it. The coverage icon blinked again, a red diagonal across the little bars. Driver Plus eased us through a long right-hander with a confidence I couldn't share. Erin's jaw clicked once. That's how I knew we were not just talking portfolios. We were hurtling toward a deadline my daughter hadn't named. When people hurry a cut, they hide the reason until the board splits in their hands. We passed a stand of lodgepole pines planted after a fire decades ago, every trunk a straight verdict. The Rivian purred, unbothered. I measured one breath to the next and pressed my palm against the folder to feel the weight of it. A gas station, a little store, a slung hammock flashed by, a life whose inventory could be counted, whose accounts reconciled with coffee and kindness. "Let Ruth review," I tried again. "I'll sign what I understand." She shook her head. "Market doesn't wait." Then, almost to herself, "Neither does time." If she'd looked at me then, she might have seen what I saw, the first hairline crack running across our beam. But she kept her eyes pinned to the sweep of lane, and the car carried us as perfectly as a jig carries a blade to wood. I shifted, the belt clicked again, and the sound was small, but truer than any of the words we'd spent in the last 10 miles. "Do you remember," I asked, "how your mother called this stretch the clean slate? Because the first time up here the radio died and we had to make our own soundtrack." Erin smiled with only a corner of her mouth. "I remember you insisted on singing." "It wasn't pretty," I said. "No," she said, "it wasn't." We both almost laughed. Almost. The road straightened, clouds pulled like batting over the ridge. I touched the pocket knife through my shirt and felt its familiar outline. The thing about a pocket knife is that it can open mail or cut a seatbelt. Purpose is not in the tool, but the hand. I thought of the front door back home, the old brass deadbolt I'd promised to replace and never did, because the scuffs meant history, and history meant love. Maybe love also meant knowing when the bolt had worn too thin. The dash chimed a final warning about service. Erin dismissed it. I didn't. Somewhere ahead, the map was going to go white and the world would shrink to what you could hold. The bare tooth rose like ribs to either side, protecting or confining. It's hard to tell the difference until you're pressed. "Let's stop at the next overlook," I said. "I need to stretch." "Fine," she said. I watched her hands on the wheel, the taut economy of motion, the way she braced her thumb before every lane change. Helen would have called it competence. I recognized something else hiding under it. A push, a rush. In carpentry, that's when splinters fly. The overlook sign appeared. Erin signaled, the Rivian's blinkers ticked twice with polite authority, and we glided in. The air met us with a chill that had read enough winters to be unimpressed by ours. I stepped out, breathed, and tasted metal in the wind. Behind my teeth, a sentence tightened, the one I'd been avoiding since Helen's last autumn. Old wood doesn't heal. You either shore it or you rebuild. The motor whirred once as the vehicle settled, impossibly calm. The creek and the creek's memory waited somewhere up trail. I put my hand on the door to steady myself and imagined the deadbolt at home, Lulu the mutt asleep on the mat, the draft under the threshold. I heard, as if from another room, a single true sound, small, decisive, irreversible. In my head, it was the sound of a bolt sliding home. In my body, it was my heart saying, "Tonight, it's your turn." The road unspooled ahead like a measuring tape pulled just a little too tight, and the Rivian rode it with the confidence of a tool that trusts its own calibration. On the dash, a small red diagonal blinked across the service bars. No service ahead. Aaron flicked it away the way a foreman brushes sawdust off a plan. Silence settled back into the cabin, that expensive hush that made every thought feel amplified, more polished than it deserved to be. I could hear my breath, the faint whir of the motors, the elastic creak of the seat stitching every time I shifted. It was the kind of quiet that sells high-end appliances, reassuring at first, then oddly clinical, as if emotion were a contaminant to be filtered out. She slid a folder onto my knee without looking, as if I were a workbench and not the reason she was up here at all. The cardstock was heavy, textured, the color of office oatmeal. Across the tab, a label maker had pressed out neat uppercase letters. Authorizations. Inside, the pages behaved like a polite crowd, lines of serif text standing in formation, durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, electronic consent writers. I had signed thousands of documents in my life, permits, purchase orders, punch lists. None of them pretended to love me. These did. They said protection and peace of mind and, as needed with a bedside manner I didn't trust. I read until a parcel number snagged my eye. The cabin on Flathead, reduced to digits and hyphens, a sterile alias for the only place left that still smelled like Helen's shampoo on rainy mornings. A paragraph a few pages down sang the virtues of good debt with the cheer of a motivational poster. HELOC, it said, as if a line of credit were a kindly aunt stepping in to help with groceries. I pictured the dock the way the boards give a fraction when you step out in April, the shock of cold through boot leather when the lake decides you should remember who is in charge. Try securitizing that, I thought. Try rolling that into a product. Aaron kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the dash like a magician palming coins. A battery warning popped. She swiped it away. A bank notification blinked. Her thumb ghosted the screen and the rectangle went black. The movement was fluid, a small choreography rehearsed until it looked like instinct. I stowed it where I keep such things when I'm framing a wall behind my ear, so I won't forget and so I won't trip over it until I have to. Standard forms, she said, eyes forward. Just sign and we can get ahead of things. There's no standard when it's my name on the line, I said, not unkind. Ruth will review. She'll slow everything down, Aaron said. I'm trying to protect your future. The future I recognized involved a porch that didn't bounce when my neighbor set down his beer. It involved a front door that swung true in all seasons, the kind you can close with your shoulder when your arms are full of groceries and faith. I turned the page and found an emergency authorization that deputized my signature to a series of digital intermediaries. There's a reason carpenters write measurements in pencil on the board itself, so the numbers live where the cut is going to happen. In the world of forms, the numbers had learned to live wherever they liked. We climbed, and the mountain opened the way. A good plan opens a little at a time, just enough to keep you honest. The light shifted, and with it the tone of everything inside the cabin. The upholstery went from warm to cool in a single cloud's drift. If Helen had been there, she would have rolled down the window 2 inches and declared that the silence was full, not empty. Without her, it sounded like a showroom, the kind where touching is frowned upon and every reflection is an accusation. I tried to steer us back to ground we knew. You remember the spur trail to the creek, I said, through the young pines. Your mother used to call it the long exhale. Vaguely, she murmured. I've got a partner call it 3 Mountain. We're tight on time. The phrase made me think of a joist under too much load. Time is always tight. You build to that reality. You don't set your kitchen island on drywall and wish it were granite. Ahead, a stand of lodgepole pines testified to patience. Planted after a burn, they had grown into a straight, forgiving jury. No one had optimized them. They stood because the ground was true and the light was enough. I closed the folder and let my hand rest on it, the way I'd rest a level on a questionable sill. You don't persuade a board to be straight by pleading. You clamp it and give it time. The Rivian screen flashed "No service again," and Erin dismissed it with the economy that made me proud when she was 10 and scared me now that she was 35. Somewhere just past that red slash, the world would reduce itself to what we could carry. "I'll sign what I understand," I said, "after Ruth looks." "My job is to anticipate risk," she said. "I'm doing that for you." Maybe she believed it. In her world, risk was a variable to be modeled and then shaved down until it looked like opportunity. In mine, risk was a knot in lumber that the supplier promised you could hide with stain. You don't stain a knot and call it integrity. You cut around it, or you throw the board in the scrap bin and build a birdhouse. Missoula drifted through my mind. The library's multi-purpose room with its folding tables and burned coffee, kids concentrating like surgeons on their first dovetails, the old guys showing up early to help sweep sawdust because it reminded them they still made something that left shavings. Those Saturdays were noisy and honest, the kind of noise that makes you sleep better. Here the electric hush was a costume, and I could feel my own face under it, itchy. The road curved to a long overlook. Erin lowered the window a crack, and a seam of cold air slid in, iron-tasting and corrective. I looked down at the folder again and saw, tucked into the back, an addendum for electronic signature in exigent circumstances. The language was flexible the way a flimsy hinge is flexible. By failing. I made a note in my head to call the bank the minute we were back in range to ask a human which locks on my accounts were actual steel and which were just chrome-plated plastic. We passed a weathered sign with a ranger hat stenciled on it and a faded arrow toward a trailhead. In another life, we would have pulled over, laced boots, and used silence to fix what words can make worse. In this one, the car kept its pace and the folder kept its weight. I traced Helen's pocket knife through my shirt with my thumb. Bone handle, one nick where I'd pried a paint can once. Tools have memories. Forms only have versions. No service blinked again. Erin said, We'll fast charge in Cook City." I nodded, a compromise between what I feared and what I could prove. I set the folder on my thigh like a square over a suspect cut, and I promised myself I would not move the blade until the marks were mine. Somewhere up ahead, the mountain would ask its question. For now, my answer was simple. Hold, observe, measure twice, and do not mistake quiet for safety. The red diagonal stayed slashed across the signal bars as we climbed into a stretch of bare tooth that felt thinner than glass. The air came in cold when Erin cracked the window, a breath that smelled like iron and sap in distances you measure with your bones. My inner level, old carpenter's superstition, tilted another notch. The mountain was about to ask a question, and it preferred yes or no answers. She clicked the blinker. 2 polite ticks, then the Rivian glided into a turnout shouldered with talus and scrub. Hazard lights winked like a courteous apology. A soft electronic chirp and the powered liftgate rose. Erin stepped out, heel sure on gravel, and set my suitcase on the stone lip as if returning a tool she didn't intend to borrow again. She placed a single bottle of water beside it. The motor's whisper dimmed when she closed the hatch. The cabin light haloed her face for a second, then went out. "Call when you're ready to support," she said, voice flat, almost kind. She didn't need to add the rest. No service, no witnesses, no room for negotiation. I stared at the bottle. The label caught the sun and threw it back at me in a sliver. I looked at her, but what I saw was the reflection of sky on tempered glass and a girl I used to carry on my shoulders across shallow creeks. Time does that. It blends 2 photographs until the edges lie. "Why here?" I asked. "Because here is quiet," she said. The door seals kissed shut. The exterior handles pulled themselves flush with a smug little flourish. Then the Rivian eased out, electric calm on blacktop, and the car that had promised to optimize our future disappeared between 2 indifferent pines. Wind filled the vacancy with the blunt honesty of weather. Dust lifted, turned to light, and fell on my boots. Anger is a poor foreman. It rushes the cut and cheats the measure. I let it flare and pass the way a dropped screw pings once on concrete and disappears under a bench. Then I did what 7 years of apprenticeship taught me to do when the drawing goes wrong. Assess, stabilize, proceed in order. Suitcase first, test the handle, test the weight. I rolled my shoulders like a man about to pick a beam. The bottle went into the side pocket. I moved to the inside edge of the gravel where the crown of the road gave me an extra shoe's width of safety. Pick a horizon point and lock on. When you're ripping a long board, your hands want to follow the teeth. Your eyes must follow the line. The air here has opinions. It told me to use short strides and breathe through my nose. It told me not to look back because there was nothing back there but a choice already made. I kept my eyes on a dent in the guardrail a quarter-mile ahead and let the white line slide past my peripheral vision like a tape measure unspooling. After a time I couldn't name, the sound arrived before the vehicle. A warm diesel murmur, sympathetic as a throat clearing before a hard truth. An RV eased onto the shoulder with the care of someone placing a favorite mug on a shaky table. The passenger window cranked down, hand turned, blessedly analog. A man with sun on his knuckles leaned out. "You in a bind, friend?" "Car trouble a few miles back," I said. The lie fit like a glove you use for rough work. Worn, functional, protective of skin you'll need later. "Phone's dead." "Hop in." "We can get you to Red Lodge." Inside, the RV smelled like coffee that had learned patience and vinyl seats that had learned forgiveness. A radio played low, a song about a truck that wouldn't quit and a woman who did, the chorus too earnest to be cruel. The woman in the passenger seat passed me a paper cup and didn't look at my suitcase. They asked nothing else. On the road, you develop a code. You help, you don't pry. You keep your stories in their boxes until someone asks for one. We rode in a quiet people can share, hills shouldered by, brown and gold. The driver downshifted with a tenderness I recognized from my own hands when I eased a door onto new hinges. I kept my palm on the suitcase handle and watched the mountains shrink into a backdrop where, on some other day, they might have taken a bow. Red Lodge's small grid appeared like a blueprint taped to a wall, lines simple and trustworthy. They let me out at the bus station, cinder blocks, a soda machine, a clerk who had seen enough to be kind and enough to be efficient. I bought a ticket with cash because cash can be folded into a back pocket where phones can't be turned on by accident or habit. The clerk slid the stub through the slot and said the next one west left in 19 minutes. I nodded and thanked her by name because it was printed there and because names matter when documents don't. On the bus, night gathered the way Stain takes to Oak, slow at first, then all at once. The window returned my face to me, older and less surprised than I felt. I cataloged what a foreman catalogs after a site accident. Foundation, frame, finish. Foundation, the promises Helen and I made about what a house is for and who gets to feel safe inside it. Frame, the trust I'd allowed to rack itself out of true by not checking for square often enough. Finish, the words I'd let code over failing joints, protect, optimize, simplify, gloss that flakes when weather finds it. I did not turn on my phone. Silence can be a weapon or a blanket. Tonight, I needed it to be a brace, the angled piece you screw in to keep two uprights from folding into one another while the glue sets. The bus hummed. A teenage couple slept with their heads touching like parentheses. Missoula at night is a comfort, lights low, dogs sensible, the smell of someone's late stew finding its way to the sidewalk. I walked the last blocks home because my legs asked for proof they still worked. On the porch, the board spoke in the small language of wood responding to temperature. The brass deadbolt was cool under my fingers. It felt thinner than it should have, like a rib you can count after an illness. Inside, I didn't turn on every light. The kitchen's warm lamp was enough to draw shadows into corners where they behave. I set the suitcase by the pantry, laid the water bottle in the sink, and pulled a spiral notebook from the drawer next to the junk drawer where the important junk lives. I wrote the first list in a long time that sounded like a plan and not a wish. Call Ruth Delgado at 8 sharp. Call a locksmith to change every exterior lock, front, back, garage, shop, gate. Reset the garage keypad. Audit who has digital access to anything that opens or pays. No phone calls to Aaron or Bryce. All communication in writing through counsel when counsel says. I took Helen's pocket knife from my shirt and set it on the notebook. Bone against cardboard, memory against intention. Tools don't care why you pick them up, only that you know where the edge is. I rinsed the dust from my hands, dried them on the towel that still has a little stain from a varnish. Mistake I never washed out on purpose, a reminder that gloss can lie. In the quiet that follows a decision, a house exhales. Mine did. I listened. Somewhere a heater kicked once, then rested. I closed the notebook, slid the pocket knife on top until the nick in its handle found the wire spiral, and felt the two seat together. There would be time enough for fury later if I wanted to waste lumber. Morning would start at the lock, then move on to paper. Tonight, I would let the glue set. Morning came clean and a little sharp, the way Missoula likes to make you earn your coffee. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched steam rise from the mug like a line level finally finding center. The notebook lay open on the table beside Helen's pocket knife, last night's list waiting like a work order pinned to the wall. When a job is ugly, I start with the hinge that squeaks the loudest. Today, that hinge was the phone. I called Ruth at 8 on the dot. The line picked up on the second ring, her voice steady in the way only decades in courtrooms can make a person. I gave her the bare facts: deserted turnout, no service, suitcase, a long walk, a kind RV, red lodge, home. The rest would live under better verbs: revoke, freeze, file. We'll handle this with paper, she said. No theatrics. I could hear her pen uncap, a small promise. I told her I wanted everything reviewed. The old trust Helen and I drew, the durable POA Aaron pushed, title on the lake cabin, any beneficiary designations that might hide in polite folders. And I added, I don't want to speak to them directly. Good, she said. Silence is leverage when used correctly. Within an hour, Ruth called back from her office with the first splinters. She'd pulled my profile across banks and brokerages, and in a portal I didn't know existed, she found a fresh, durable POA bearing my electronic signature dated 2 weeks ago. There was an associated log, voice verification completed at 2:14 p.m. that same day. You didn't do a voice check then, she said, more statement than question. I had been at the library workshop, clamping a teenager's crooked shelf and telling him to trust slow pressure. Ruth asked for a recording sample used to enroll me. The bank provided a transcript tag pointing to public audio. A small podcast episode I'd once cut for the library, me reading a paragraph about dovetails, had apparently become my skeleton key. We're freezing every biometric pathway right now, she said, and we're demanding a full technical audit. The second splinter, a preliminary HELOC file on the cabin, not funded yet but warming on the back burner, queued by the same authority. Ruth's voice lost none of its calm. We'll kill that pipeline. I want written confirmation that nothing disperses without your wet signature. I pictured sunlight on the dock and felt something settle behind my ribs. Do it, I said. Then came the work I could hold. I called a locksmith I'd used once after a neighbor locked herself out. He arrived before 10 in a blue shirt with his name stitched above the heart and a toolbox like a small arc. We started at the front door. The old brass came off with a tired groan, screws surrendering tarnish onto his bit. He cleaned the bore with a whine that raised the tiny hairs along my forearms. The new deadbolt slid home with a fit so precise it made a sound you can feel in your teeth. Solid, declarative, irrevocable. We moved to the back door. The garage, the shop, the side gate. I kept a ledger as he cut keys, each location labeled with a neat carpenter's print, each key stamped and tested twice. The rhythm soothed me. Remove, drill, seat, test. Not a single shortcut. Rushing a lock is how a stranger learns your schedule. Between doors, I worked my digital hinges. Passwords first, then two-factor everywhere I could find a toggle. I removed Aaron and Bryce from the doorbell app, the garage app, the thermostat app that never really read the house as closely as Helen could by touch. I turned off biometric logins and chose methods that required a human in the loop, the kind of friction that keeps honest people honest and gives thieves blisters. I wrote the backup codes down with a pencil and slid the paper into an envelope marked with the same care I give to a finished edge. Ruth sent me boilerplate to revoke anything pretending to be my will in pixels. I signed with ink that bled a little on the fibers. She also told me to send a preservation demand to the dealership that managed Aaron's Rivian lease. All telematics, all door events, GPS coordinates, timestamps for last night's stop. Machines remember what people spin. If we needed to prove intent, a quiet car could testify loudly. After lunch, I opened a new bank account at a credit union where tellers still greet you from a stool. I deposited enough to run the house and the shop, and nothing to tempt anyone who measures love in balance sheets. Alerts would come by paper and text to the flip phone Ruth keeps for clients who need a number no one knows. The old accounts would be audited line by line, and anything that smelled like helpful automation would be replaced by plain language, yes, no, sign here in front of a person. The locksmith finished near 3. He laid 3 sets of keys on the kitchen table like a dealer sharing a quiet mercy. Each key felt heavier than its metal, each one a permission reclaimed. I threaded my set onto a ring that had carried the same 2 pieces since Helen and I bought this place. The ring looked different, busier, more honest about what it took to keep a house a house. I handed one set to the shop drawer labeled hardware, odd, and tucked another into the envelope Ruth would seal for her fireproof cabinet. Ruth called once more before close. "Tomorrow, 8:30 at my office," she said. "We sign the revocation. We file notices. Then we start the QPRT to park the cabin where hands can't reach it, with your lifetime right to occupy spelled in bold." I heard her keyboard staccato punctuation. "I also want to draft the Helen Hale Workshop Fund. If you're willing, we anchor your values in a trust that outlives noise." "I'm willing," I said. The word surprised me with its warmth. It felt like a coat in November. Near dusk, I walked the perimeter, checking each latch the way I check clamps before glue-up. The house breathed deeper under me. In the shop, I set the new ledger next to the knife. The little nick in its handle found the spiral again like a magnet knows its nail. There's a satisfaction you can't buy when a plan begins to take shape under your hands. Not triumph, not yet. Just alignment.v. I turned off the lights room by room, leaving the place darker, safer, simpler. Tomorrow would be signatures and filings, statutes and structures, anchors and braces. Tonight, my only job was to sleep inside a boundary I could trust. If you're still watching and want to see how this decision plays out, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on. I arrived at Ruth's office 10 minutes early, which is the only way I know how to show respect anymore. Be there, be steady, be ready to sign what you understand. The lobby had the cold glow of new glass and the quiet weight of old wood. Outside, the city wore its daylight like a pressed shirt. Ruth's assistant led me into a conference room with a table broad enough for a map of a small war. I stood alone for a minute and arranged my breath the way I arrange clamps before a glue-up. Even, patient, no wobble. When Ruth came in, she brought the day's weather with her, brisk and exact. She set a banker's stack on the table, tabs marching like a row of chisels, each one honed for a specific cut. She started with the revocation, the legal equivalent of bracing a failing wall. She placed a single page in front of me where the language was uncharacteristically short. "We'll handle this with paper," she said, uncapping a pen and pointing to a line. The ink flowed dark and decisive. Wet signatures have a sound in your wrist, tiny, certain, as if a bolt were seeding into new wood. Ruth slid carbon copies aside, flicked her phone to speaker, and the room filled with the careful consonants of bankers and brokers. She read the revocation number, the timestamp, and the routing for service. "Effective immediately," she told them. The phrase didn't ring, it landed. Next came the electrical work, shutting off live lines before someone gets shocked. She dispatched letters to every institution. Disable voice verification, disable facial recognition, disable any consent that could be conjured without my physical hand. She requested that every transaction above a modest number require an in-person appointment and a notary. On one call, a representative tried to soften the protocol, customer experience, and convenience, and so on. Ruth's pencil tapped the table once. "We are mitigating elder financial abuse risk," she said, and that small, unpleasant phrase did the work of a breaker thrown in a dark basement. Lights out on shortcuts. We moved to the cabin. Ruth opened a fresh stack labeled QPRT and walked me through the structure with the patience of a master explaining a jig to an apprentice. The cabin would sit inside a truss like a boat on blocks, high enough that floodwater can't lick it, and with my lifetime right to live there bolted to the frame. Each page carried terms precise as miters. I initialed margins and signed footers until the stack was no longer a stack but a shape. "Filed today," she said. The county stamp would be an ugly purple, the way all protective things are more useful than pretty. She had saved a folder with a gentler name for a sharp purpose, the Helen Hale Workshop Fund. It wasn't a billboard. It was a set of rails that would keep the small train we had built, weekend workshops, shop stipends for late-life apprentices, a few replacement planers, moving long after I stopped being the guy who turns on the dust collector. We drafted a charter in plain language. We included the phrase I care most about, hands that still make. Satisfying work doesn't require applause, it requires lumber and time and someone to show you where the grain wants to go. Then she dialed the lender warming that HELOC pipeline. She identified herself, cited the revocation, and invoked their own audit trail about voice authentication borrowed from a library podcast. I heard her draw a line none of us would cross. "No disbursement without a wet signature," she said. I signed the follow-up letter she had prepared. The scratch of my name felt like shoring under a sagging beam. Wedged snug, a sound rather than a celebration. Lawyers don't posture when they're winning, they document. Her firm's letter to Aaron and Bryce read like a weather report you ignore at your own peril. It listed every action taken, revocation, freezes, QPRT initiation, and set a boundary that did not require volume to be loud. In 2 paragraphs, it warned that any further access attempt would trigger filing under Montana's elder financial exploitation statutes, with exhibits and witnesses already queued. Nothing about the letter was dramatic. That is how you know it has teeth. Confirmations began to arrive in a clipped rhythm, emails and faxes that behaved like rivets. Brokerage, authority revoked, e-consents disabled. Bank, biometrics offline, branch only for withdrawals. Insurer, financial power removed from file. Ruth slid each to my side for the quick date-time scrawl. The page corners climbed like a well-laid shingle roof. Overlap, overlap, no leaks. Between calls, she had already sent a preservation demand to the EV leasing company for full telematics, door events, GPS points, time-stamped stops. Machines do not take sides, but they remember. Somewhere in Denver, at a counter that smelled of rubber and anodized aluminum, a card beeped denial. I wasn't there, but the scene writes itself if you've seen Pride with nowhere to stand. The associate's smile tightening by a degree. A second attempt, another beep, the small hush that follows a public miscalculation. Explanations are rehearsed before they're needed. The words "system glitch" wear out fast under fluorescent lights. Shame is not a punishment I relish. It is a floor you discover when the ceiling falls. I took out my phone not to open lines but to pose one. I typed 4 words I had rehearsed last night because discipline is the art of deciding once. I'm home safe. The message felt less like a statement and more like the return of my name to my own pocket. If she read it as provocation, so be it. If she read it as a lighthouse she could steer toward later, good. Either way, the tide moves on the moon's schedule, not our texts. By late afternoon, the building across from Ruth's windows cast a re-sewn shadow. She gathered the copies into labeled envelopes and placed my set in a slim gray folder. On top, she left the revocation, a copy of the QPRT deed, and the first draft of the workshop fund charter. "You have structure," she said. Structure isn't comfort, it's capacity. It doesn't make a storm pleasant, it makes the roof honest. Back home, the new deadbolt accepted the key with a sound that argued for itself, metal committing to its seat. The house felt different, not cleaner, not bigger, just truer. On the kitchen table, I laid out the documents like cut pieces ready for assembly. The day had used a paper hammer, revoking, freezing, filing, anchoring. None of it would fix betrayal. All of it would keep betrayal from drafting my plans. In the quiet that followed, I placed the gray folder in the drawer where we keep warranties and birth certificates. Tomorrow, the next cut. I would sit across from the people I raised and, by saying very little, keep the frame from racking any further. Ruth's conference room was the sort of neutral space where decisions don't echo. Glossed concrete, a long pane of glass for a table, chairs that refused to recline. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a seat with my back to the window so their faces would have nowhere to hide. I placed Helen's camping photo in my inside pocket, not as a weapon, not quite a charm, more like a stud finder, something that tells you where a wall is truly supported. Aaron and Bryce came on the minute, composed the way people practice in elevators, shoulders squared, expressions preloaded. They sat across the glass and arranged their hands so the rings caught light. Ruth entered last, placed a stack of folders on the table with the economy of a carpenter setting out chisels, and closed the door with a soft finality that asked for no permission. "This is a notice meeting," she said, level and cool. "We are not negotiating." The first folder slid to their side, revocation of durable power of attorney, stamped acknowledgments from institutions stacked behind it, bank, brokerage, insurer. "Effective as of yesterday at 10:42 a.m., Ruth added. "Paper can be louder than raised voices when the timing is exact." The next folder, a county receipt and a bound instrument with tabs like stitches. "Qualified Personal Residence Trust. Cabin on Flathead conveyed, with my lifetime right to occupy in bold." Bryce skimmed the headings and found nothing to latch onto except the reality that a door had closed. The third folder, the demand letter they'd already received, restated without adjectives. "Stop accessing what is not yours. Attempted again and we file." Ruth opened a laptop and turned it so the screen faced them. The video began without music, without narration, without mercy. The RV dashcam, date and time stamps blinking a sober blue. The Rivian nosed into a turnout, my suitcase in Erin's hand, the bottle of water catching light, her arm making a small, clean gesture toward the empty shoulder. The sound was wind and tire, and something that might have been my breath, or might have been the microphone deciding what to keep. Then the car pulled away, so smooth it looked like absence deciding to be permanent. No one spoke. The footage ended on sky and road, a quiet horizon rolling forward. Ruth paused the frame where Erin's back had just turned and let the stillness work. My heart didn't pound. It kept a carpenter's count. 1, 2, square, plumb. Ruth's finger touched the space bar. The screen went black. "Fiduciary duty requires acting in the best interest of the grantor," she said. "Abandoning a 67-year-old in a no-service zone cuts the leash you were holding. Any further attempt to present yourselves as guardians of his interests will be met by statute. Elder financial exploitation with exhibits." Her voice didn't lift on the last word. She was laying flooring, not a trap. She slid over a slim spiral report next. Expenditures from secondary accounts where Erin's name appeared as a signer. Week in Bali, club dues, designer gear, recurring lifestyle consulting. Columns of numbers that looked tidy until you understood the mess they represented. Erin's eyes landed and skittered, not unlike a level bubble when the surface underneath turns out to be wrong. Bryce recovered first, turning crisp, reaching for legalese like a man grabbing a rope that's already cut. He produced a photocopy of a Wyoming power of attorney, flattened it with both palms, and said something about cross-jurisdictional instruments and vested interests. His voice had the hard sheen of confidence worn thin. "There is a parallel POA," he said, "executed out of state." Ruth did not smile. She placed another document beside it, a certified copy of the notary's journal for that county. Columns ruled, dates like fence posts. The notary of record was not on duty that day, she said. The signatures didn't match. The registration number traced to a clerk who had retired last spring. This is invalid. It also invites a separate complaint for notarial fraud. She looked at the wall clock, then back at them. You have 3 days to withdraw from any access or claim you have created. Written confirmation only. She was not finished. From a manila envelope, she produced an affidavit, single-spaced and neat, signed by a neighbor with a tidy hand. Retired Judge Cal Peterson had witnessed multiple entries into my home via the app, heard remarks about clearing out the old man's junk, and logged dates. In my neighborhood, affidavits carry more weight when written by someone who knows the difference between meddling and testimony. The paper sat there with the quiet authority only experience affords. The room felt colder, or maybe the glass finally did its job and showed us each other properly. I took the Helen photo from my pocket and set it gently in the center of the table. She is on a trail above timberline, wind in her hair, sun high but softened by thin air. Erin's face changed in a way that was not calculation. She looked at her mother's smile and something blinked behind her eyes like a pilot light catching. My mother wouldn't have done this, I said. 4 words, slow and unadorned. They were not an argument. They were a plumb line dropped from a beam to the floor to reveal how far off we had drifted. Ruth gathered the folders as if collecting tools after a good cut. Revocation stands. QPRT is filed. Any approach to assets will result in immediate filings. She capped her pen. You have until close of business Friday to confirm in writing that you will desist. After that, we proceed. She didn't ask for agreement. She stood. We stood with her. The chairs made small, embarrassed sounds on the floor. Erin did not reach for me. I did not reach for her. The goodbyes stayed unspoken because they didn't yet qualify as good or bye. Bryce folded his photocopy, tucked it into a jacket pocket that sagged under the weight of paper pretending to be law, and followed her out. In the elevator lobby, I let out the breath I'd kept level through the meeting. Not a collapse, not triumph, just the release a house gives when you add a diagonal brace and the rattle in the windows stops. The testimony we'd assembled, paper, footage, signatures, a judge's tidy affidavit, was not revenge. It was framing. You can hang drywall on lies, but you can't hang doors. Outside, Missoula wore a different expression than it had that morning. Maybe the light shifted. Maybe I did. I walked to the truck that ferries my small life. Thermos, shop apron, a pencil behind the sun visor with teeth marks from thinking. On the way home, I did not run scenarios. I did not draft speeches. I counted 3 days, not for ultimatums, for gravity to complete what law had begun. The house met me with a new steadiness when I turned the key, and the click of the deadbolt behind me sounded less like a lock and more like a verdict gently delivered. The house met me at the door with the small assurance of metal doing its job. The new deadbolt took the key and answered with that low, convincing thud I'd begun to crave. Inside, afternoon light pooled across the kitchen tile in squares that looked measured, as if the sun had borrowed my framing square. I hung my jacket on the hook Helen used to claim and poured a tall glass of water, letting the first long drink wash the courthouse taste from my mouth. After a meeting like that, the body needs a simple task: swallow, breathe, stand still. My phone vibrated on the counter, screen bright with the backlog of other people's urgency. I turned it face down. The rule still held: no text, no calls, nothing direct. Everything went through Ruth. Our brace against another buckle in the frame. Silence isn't hiding. It's a cross brace. I let the quiet stand where voices would have leaned and toppled. By evening, the calls from Erin had gone thin and then stopped altogether. In their place came an email from Bryce, subject line, family resolution, private. The body carried an apology shaped like a marketing plan and an invitation to step outside the legal context for a healing conversation. Ruth, copied, replied with a single sentence about channeling all communications through counsel. I read both on the printed copies she prefers to send me, ink on paper that doesn't buzz, and folded them back into the gray folder. My pulse stayed steady. The feeling wasn't victory, it was the steadiness after a beam finds a new post. Work has always been my way back to myself. I rolled the shop cart into the kitchen and planed the high spots out of the butcher block island until the shavings curled like ribbon and the surface whispered true under the straight edge. I lifted the back door off its hinges, pared the swollen edge with a few patient passes, set the leaf back, and watched the latch catch on the first try. I swapped the entry mat for a new coir one that would catch grit before it could grind itself into the grain. Each small fix returned a square foot of the house to my name. The sounds were familiar medicine, the rasp of paper, the click of metal, the satisfied hush when wood sits the way it's supposed to. The next morning I met with the board at the community shop, a half circle of faces I know better by their hands than their resumes. We sat at the scarred work table that has seen more learning than any glossy classroom, and I signed the seed grant agreement for what Ruth had named the Helen Hale Workshop Fund. We talked schedules and stipends, how to structure a paid apprenticeship track for folks 50 and older who need a paycheck as much as a purpose. We settled on the first scholarship name, Helen's Bench, because that's where she listened before she taught. On my way out, I ran my palm along the jointer's iron bed, felt its cool promise, and pictured someone's late-life hands feeding a plank through until the board sang flat. Back at Ruth's, I signed the will that fit the new frame. QPRT acknowledged. Fund endowed as it grows. My lifetime right to live at the cabin in language no opportunist could sand round. We named an executor who has never confused kindness with weakness and a community trustee who understands that a good shop keeps extra pencils because worry chews them down. She tucked one sealed original into her fireproof drawer and handed me another in a thick envelope that made the future feel less like fog and more like a road you can drive at night. At the kitchen table, I wrote a letter to Erin in my slow carpenter's hand. Paper insists on patience, and I needed the friction. I told her the door would be unlocked if she came alone, without Bryce, and if she brought a true apology without varnish. I asked her to commit to financial counseling and family therapy with a real professional, not one of their friends. I kept it short enough that every sentence had to carry its weight. I did not send it yet. Some doors you measure twice before you even think about a cut. Then I made another kind of inventory. I opened every app tied to a lock, a bell, a thermostat, a camera. I printed access logs and highlighted entries that didn't belong. I disabled secondary integrations, the little ladders thieves like best, and exported a list of permissions to paper. The list went into an envelope with the spare keys, labeled in pencil and filed in the drawer that has never lost a thing important. I turned the doorbell chime down one notch, enough to know the world was still outside, not enough to let it live in my head. Life returned in small, proper measures. I swept the porch, pushing a line of September dust down the steps until the concrete looked like reset margins. I watered the geraniums that Helen started from a neighbor's cuttings. The leaves gave off a green smell that felt like a yes. Lulu sprawled on the new mat with the sigh of a creature who doesn't know statutes but understands peace. The house answered with tiny expansions and contractions in the framing, not the frantic rattle of a structure under pressure, but the even breathing of wood matching the temperature of its rooms. Sitting at the workbench, I realized I wasn't chasing a win. Wins are for scoreboards. I wanted jurisdiction over my name, my house, the memory of the woman who steadied me through the first worst storms. Grief had been sanded into the grain of this place, and no polish could or should erase it. But decay, left alone, becomes rot. The difference is maintenance. Today had been maintenance. I arranged the new ring of keys on the table and slid each into a little ziplock labeled with a neat carpenter's print. Front, back, shop, gate. The unsent letter to Erin went under the top key, and beneath that the next appointment card for Ruth. I noted the day, the hour, and the task in my ledger the way I've always logged a job site. Who, what, where, why done. Dusk arrived with its honest shadows. I carried a chair onto the porch and sat where I could see the house's silhouette drawn long across the yard, true to line, corners square. A week since the turnout, and every lock that should be new was new. Every boundary that needed steel had steel. Tomorrow I'd take the duplicate keys to Ruth and let time work on what paper had set. The night gathered, the porch boards creaked their agreement, and I stayed where I was until the cool made me grateful for a door that closes and a house that knows I'm the one who closes it. 1 week to the hour after the turnout, I stood at my front door with the new ring of keys heavy in my palm. The metal had already learned my fingerprints. The deadbolt received it with that low, convincing thud that now passes for a heartbeat in this house. I walked the circuit like a foreman before inspection, front, back, garage, shop, side gate, testing each throw, each latch, each quiet promise. Satisfied, I nested the duplicate set into a small manila envelope and printed in block letters. For Ruth. Her office felt warmer this time, not because the air had changed, but because my posture had. I handed over the envelope and the printed list of digital permissions I'd compiled. Doorbell, keypad, garage, thermostat, each entry timed, trimmed, and notarized in effect by common sense. Ruth slid the packet into her fireproof drawer and had me countersign the final confirmations. POA revoked, biometrics disabled, branch and notary only. The copies wore fresh stamps like good boots, ugly, functional, ready for weather. On her desk sat an email from the EV leasing company. It read like an autopsy. GPS points within 1/10 of a mile, door events at 318, 319, 321, vehicle departure at 322, no cell coverage indicated. A separate letter from their compliance department warned that abandoning a passenger in a no-service zone violates safety terms. Ruth routed both into our evidence file, not as threats, but as braces you leave in place so the frame stays true. Consequences have a way of appearing without fanfare. I did not see Aaron's card decline in a Denver store or the moment the Rivian's lien holder decided to pull the keystones out from under their performances. I heard indirectly that the EV left a curb on a flatbed while a neighbor watched and pretended not to. I pictured cardboard boxes migrating into an apartment 2 beltways out, a balcony with a railing warm to the touch at noon. I did not cheer. Gravity is not vindictive, it is instruction. Online, the curated life dimmed. Aaron's last caption, something about optimizing joy, sat above a calendar date that now feels older than it is. The comments slowed, then stopped. It turns out applause is a kind of weather, and when the heat money gives a life dissipates, the air goes still. I didn't scroll further. I closed the app and wiped a small smear from the kitchen glass where my hand must have rested when I leaned. Back home, I read the letter I wrote her 2 days ago with my slowest hand. The words still held. If she came alone, if she brought a real apology, if she committed to counseling worth its invoice, the door would be unlocked. Not open, unlocked. There's a difference a hinge understands. I slid the letter beneath the spare keys in my desk and closed the drawer. Some messages need time to earn their postmark. At the community shop, we hung a modest wooden placard over the end bench, Helen's bench. Maple letters on walnut, chamfered by hand because machines round things too quickly. We announced the first paid apprenticeships for folks 50 and older, printed sign-up sheets, marked out a calendar on craft paper with blue tape, and wrote in big letters what mattered: stipend, schedule, simple lunch provided. The room answered with the hum of machines and the small, brave noises of people learning. It sounded like an antidote. Ruth's office hosted one more necessary ritual, a will that matched the architecture we'd built this week. I initialed margins and signed footers. Executor named, trustee appointed, cabin rights and language even a shortcut artist would hate. She gave me a copy thick enough to hold its own on a shelf and another for the safe at home. Phase 1 is closed, she said, handing over a memo that read like a site log. Revocation complete, QPRT recorded, fund established. Beneath it, a list of options if lines were crossed again. Elder financial exploitation, notary fraud, civil remedies. We weren't stockpiling weaponry. We were labeling shut-off valves. I drove to the cabin on a weekday morning simply because I could. The lake wore its September honesty, cold enough to correct you if you forgot who owned whom. My key met the lock like a handshake with an old friend. Inside smelled of dust and cedar. I opened windows, wiped counters, tightened the hinge that had been talking back for years. I made coffee as if I were doing it for two and sat at the small table as if Helen were still across from me, saying that the view made even bad decisions look temporarily noble. Down on the shore, I released a thin stem of hyacinth into water so clear it didn't seem real until it numbed my fingers. No one will optimize this, I thought. It exists outside their verbs. Driving home, I said the thing out loud that had been moving through me in quieter form. I am not here to win. I am here to own my name and steward what we built. The grief doesn't thin, it integrates. It shows up in the way I set plates to dry, in the pause before I switch off a lamp, in the habit of listening for phantom footsteps that never quite materialize. But the rot is gone. What remains is maintenance. I can do maintenance. Back on the porch at dusk, Lulu stretched on the new choir mat and thumped her tail once with the dignity of an old dog who approves. The house exhaled like a body released from a brace it no longer needs. I sealed Ruth's copy of the keys and laid the envelope next to Helen's pocketknife in the drawer with the warranties, its nicked handle catching on the spiral of my ledger. In that ledger, I wrote today's line the way I used to close out job sites. Date, action, witness. Then I added a sentence under it because some work deserves words. 1 week ago, I was left in the mountain silence. Tonight, I choose the silence of boundaries. I moved to the steps and watched the yard draw long and even. Across the street, a porch light came on, not bright, just true. On the page still open beside the knife, I penciled the reminder I carry like a shop proverb, never bargain with a cracked foundation. And beneath it, I left space. Tomorrow, perhaps, the lesson will ask for a fuller telling. Tonight, the structure can stand on what it has. Steel in the right places, wood in the honest ones, and a quiet that doesn't erase but contains. Night settled over Missoula like a wool blanket with just enough weight to soothe. I sat on the porch with the small lamp on, the one that throws a warm circle over my knees and leaves the rest of the yard to the crickets. Helen's pocketknife lay open beside my ledger, the bone handle catching the light, the nick I made years ago fitting the wire spiral like two parts that were meant to meet. Inside, the house spoke its timbered language, subtle ticks as framing equalized, the refrigerator's shy hum, the new deadbolt's occasional metallic sigh as it remembered its shape. Nothing rang for my attention. No pings, no banners, no urgency that belonged to somebody else. A week has taught me that the right kind of quiet isn't absence, it's structure. I know two kinds of silence now. There was the mountains silence, the kind that shoves you against your limits and makes you count breaths because counting is the only tool you have. And there is the boundaries silence, the kind you choose and maintain, a cross brace that keeps the frame from racking when a storm leans hard. The first kind was a lesson in survival. The second is a practice of dignity. Between them is the distance we traveled in 7 days, from being left to being intact. If I line the week up on the table, it looks like a neat row of operations: revoke, freeze, file, endow, replace. But each was a moral choice disguised as paperwork. We took back the signature that had been forged in pixels and turned every system from convenience to contact. We parked the cabin on legal footing no shortcut can undermine and wrote my lifetime right to that door in letters thick enough to stop a pry bar. We named a fund for Helen that will buy lumber and stipends instead of applause. We changed locks you can hold in your palm and locks you cannot see. None of it was punishment. It was the prevention that should have started years ago. I had to admit my part. Generosity can turn into insulation for someone else's worst habits if you lay it too thick. I had called it love, and sometimes it was. But sometimes it was laziness wearing a father's smile, the kind of enabling that feels kind until it fossilizes into entitlement. Love doesn't mean grant access to your safes. It means hand over tools and teach the cut. I didn't draw that line early enough. I'm drawing it now, but to anyone my age who feels the same bruise I do, your hands know the way back. Work is a road with mile markers you can trust. At the shop we hung the sign, Helen's Bench, and the room changed temperature. A man in his 60s planed a stubborn board flat and grinned like he'd shaken a hand he'd missed for 20 years. A woman who hadn't held a chisel since high school cut a clean mortise and then just rested her fingers on the edge as if heat could carry through steel. The machines made their honest noise. Nobody argued with a router. We set the stipend schedule and a simple lunch because hunger turns into short tempers faster than pride will admit. Hands that still make isn't a slogan, it's a prescription. As for family, the door is unlocked under conditions only adulthood can respect. I wrote the letter, I meant every stroke of the pen, come alone, apologize without spin. Commit to counseling that tells hard truths and measures progress in years, not weeks. If those conditions feel harsh, then the threshold will feel high, and that's correct. The house can hold grief, it cannot bear another cycle of promises routed through the same habit loops. A return is not a reset button, it's a slower craft that starts with wood selection, not stain. This era has a way of confusing lights for heat, attention for affection. When the money stopped, the feed slowed, and the audience wandered. I did not rejoice. I took note. Digital stature is not an heirloom. Value is what keeps working when no one is watching. The fund that cuts a check for a stipend, a cabin that is warm in March, a home with locks that answer to the right key, and a ledger that balances without magic. Those are things you can bequeath without blushing. Debt also pretends to be a friend. In the right context, a line of credit is a lever, but levers belong under beams designed to bear them. Try using one on drywall and you'll punch through to embarrassment. The HELOC file we killed would have converted history into a spreadsheet's weekend errand. Maybe debt can expand a life when it's hung from load-bearing values. Maybe it only amplifies delusion when it isn't. The proverb I'll keep is simple. Never put force where structure won't hold. I won't nourish bitterness. The world is full of men who mistake scorn for strength and spend their last decades licking a wound into infection. I will not join them. I closed valves, I labeled shutoffs, I left room for repair. If Erin approaches with time in her voice and work in her eyes, the threshold is there. If not, distance can be merciful. Mercy sometimes sounds like a quiet you didn't expect to find. So this is the part where I say the thing I needed to hear a year ago. If someone has mistaken your kindness for access, you can take your name back. Start with one lock. Make one call to a lawyer who speaks in timetables, not thunder. Move your check to a teller who knows your first name and not your phone's face. You don't have to be dramatic. You have to be sequential. Glue needs order. So does a life. I stood, stretched my back, and carried the envelope with Ruth's set of keys to the small safe. The packet slid in beside the workshop fund binder and the folder of birth certificates and deeds that always smell faintly of school. I set Helen's pocket knife on top. I am done signing from fear. I am done signing from fatigue. From here on, I sign from understanding. Dawn previews itself a little after 5 this time of year. The east wall in the living room lightened by a shade, then by 2 as if color were climbing the studs. I wrote in the ledger, slow and square. Do not bargain on a cracked foundation. Then I left a thumb's width of blank under it. The story isn't finished. Boundaries don't end a family. They just stop harm long enough for something better to begin. Maybe she'll knock one day with her hands empty of excuses. Maybe she won't. Either way, the house is sound. The cabin waits. The shop has a stool open. And the day when I open the door will come in like the honest air it's always been. When the noise fades, what remains isn't emptiness. It's structure. Boundaries drawn with calm hands become a kind of quiet that protects what matters. Dignity over drama, stewardship over spectacle. There is a difference between generosity and indulgence. One strengthens a foundation, the other hides its cracks. And there is a difference between convenience and consent. One moves things faster, the other makes them true. In the end, a life is rebuilt the same way a sound home is framed. Measure twice, cut once, anchor in load-bearing values, and let time cure the joints. Forgiveness can coexist with distance. Mercy can look like shutting the valve before the whole line bursts. The work is not to win, but to keep custody of your name, your doors, and the legacy of honest labor. If the day asks for proof, offer what endures. Locks that answer to the right key, accounts that balance without magic, and hands that still make. Thank you for watching. If this closing spoke to you, share your thoughts below. What line stayed with you? Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Your comments keep this community thoughtful and alive.